Misinformation is a big one, right? Trust, the ability of people to trust businesses, to trust their governments, to trust the content that they consume is critical.
Welcome to the Block and Tackle Show, hosted by Karl Block. He'll be tackling some of the biggest issues in business today. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Karl Block here, host of the Block and Tackle Show. I have a very special and accomplished guest today, Lisa Gable, a former U.S. ambassador, UN delegate, best-selling author, and one of the most trusted voices in business, government, and nonprofit leadership. She has advised 4 U.S. presidents, served under governors, and worked with Fortune 500 companies like Apple, Intel, and PepsiCo. Lisa is known for fixing broken systems, aligning opposing sides, turning around struggling organizations, and delivering results. She's also a champion of ethical leadership, women in business, and building smart partnerships that actually work. Lisa, welcome to the Block and Tackle Show.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. You have an incredible bio, and I'm sure with time it's even going to get longer and longer and longer. And I just have to say, in going through things, there's so much there. We actually had to work through, okay, what are we going to include? What are we not going to include? Because it's so vast. But let's start with one of the more current things you're doing. Tell us about the world in 2050. What is that all about?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. The World in 2050 is the futuristic think tank of the Diplomatic Courier, which is an international media company that also has a magazine and does convenings at some of the top meetings in the world, like Davos and the G8 and the G20. What we're looking at in the world of 2050 is really trying to track trends and seeing what trends we need to go on the uptick in order to have the world arrive well. And so that looks at things around AI. We're looking at education. We're looking at happiness within certain environments. And so we're tracking a series of different metrics with the goal of saying that if we want the world to arrive well in 2050, these are the things that we need to focus on.
Okay. And what do you think are the most, important, high importance, can't wait types of things that you guys are working on now?
Misinformation is a big one, right? Trust, the ability of people to trust businesses, to trust their governments, to trust the content that they consume is critical. The second is looking at education, because the world of education is changing dramatically. And I think actually in a good way, as we look at the opportunities with technology. Perhaps we look at the price tags of four-year universities and the applicability of things that students are learning to what we actually need them to learn in order to ensure that we have innovation and can provide goods and services to people, from healthcare to medicine to day-to-day services. We want to make sure that education itself also transcends where it is today and has the opportunity that perhaps different types of education, whether it's encouraging people into 2-year education combined with some specialties and certification, or if it's a matter of ensuring that we have enough tech people that are providing the goods and services. Those are 2 probably of the biggest issues that I've been driving.
So let me just say, those are excellent things to talk about. And I think I'm going to take them in reverse order. First, with education, I know that you know the statistics that fewer and fewer people are matriculating to 4-year colleges. And I'm sure you're aware that employers are saying, we get these people who graduate and the skills they learn in college don't translate to the job market. And then you have the issue of AI. And if you're teaching students to be prepared for the jobs of yesterday, as opposed to the jobs of tomorrow, it's a real problem. Do you face any institutional reluctance from higher education to actually understand that this is a technology revolution?
You do across the board. You also do through K through 12 education, and OECD has actually written quite a bit about this. They've also focused on issues around what happens if there's another major disasters, what happens if we have something like COVID happen again, or even something worse. Do we have any resilience in the system? So it's not only that we are operating with systems that have a fairly traditional mindset, whether in the United States it's K through 12, and then community college, post-secondary school, and graduate school. But we're also looking, we've already had an experience where children were not able to participate in the educational process during a time period where they were locked in their houses, right? Where they couldn't go out. And so we know that that is a potential, yet we're not planning for it. The other that I look at is you have educational opportunities around the world. We currently have a system that negatively impacts people based on the geography in which they live. Think about that. If you live in a poor neighborhood, you don't have access to a physics teacher. You don't have access to the best calculus teacher. Maybe you don't have access to a science teacher. But we're in the world of technology. There's no reason whatsoever that someone should not be able to have a system that easily brings in the best and the brightest in order to train kids from wherever they physically live. And so we're restraining the system based on geography. And so that's one issue. Secondarily, is that a lot of parents are working in these 24/7 environments, but the education system itself isn't lending itself to supporting that. We stick everybody in 9 to 5 and or, whatever it is, 9 to 3 in the United States and Monday through Friday. Well, life doesn't work Monday through Friday, 9 to 3. And we have had many conversations about, what do we need to make the education week shorter? Do we need to make the manufacturing week shorter? I did an article talking about the fact of, let's look at all the hours in a week, and try to figure out what it is you need to accomplish. And then look at the environment in which you live. If you have a company towns, Silicon Valley, where a lot of kids' parents are, on the phone at 9 o'clock to India, or they are working with Europe in a different time zone, why are we still only providing a service in a set time period that A, we don't get access to the best, and B, we're not meeting the needs of, anyone with special requirements, neurodivergent kids, kids with autism, kids who are on the spectrum, or kids with dyslexia and others. We have crunched everybody into the same as, and we know it's not working. And so I think as we look at education, and another component of this is then looking at online education and the degree to which you can get special certifications, you can get adaptations that meet the environment in which you are operating. So we have a lot of opportunity, but it's actually not driving the design of the systems we have today, nor do we have resilient systems where we have actually troubleshooted and thought about what happens when the next disaster occurs. And we don't have an answer for that.
That makes a lot of sense. And obviously, there's a lot there. I just want to ask you one narrow aspect of this, because I talk to business people and we wonder about what I'm about to say. So when you have schools who have STEM teachers who learned STEM maybe decades ago, and they're not keeping up with what students need to learn. I'm just curious when somebody will say, we need a partnership with Silicon Valley to say, we want you to teach our STEM classes. And to your point, you can do it by Zoom, so you can reach the poor neighborhoods, you can reach other countries if necessary, but you have people who are really cutting edge, up to date, and able to teach students much more what they need to know when they graduate than somebody who might not be equipped, as sincere and hardworking as they might be.
Right. And when you think about it, we're constantly going, we need to find more teachers who can teach this stuff. And we've been trying to find more people who can teach this stuff, and we never will. We just aren't going to. We can't fill the gaps.
Well, I would say this, and then I want to ask you about trust. If somebody has to go through an education system where they're an undergraduate and they spend 4 years as an undergraduate, and then maybe they get a master's degree, so they have a teaching credential, that's 6 years of them not being updated with the trends. And that's why I say, I really don't know why people aren't looking at public-private partnerships with big tech companies, because again, they're living it every day. And
I 100% agree. And I've talked to families who homeschool in San Francisco. These are not people who are homeschooling for religious reasons. They are literally homeschooling because of education reasons. And so you have this group of kids in San Francisco with very educated parents who went to Stanford and other schools. And they do have their children taking courses with a Stanford professor on Zoom. Right? It's not as if they're shipping them down the peninsula. They're not. They actually have the Stanford professor that's teaching this group of kids. And so we know it's already happening, but it's only happening when the parents drive it and the parents make it happen. And the reality is it could actually be across the United States. Chris Whittle, when he designed his schools, what does he do? He's got kids working with kids in China and Romania and other locations on joint projects. The opportunities exist, but it takes a teacher who's willing to fight the system. It takes parents who are willing to add the extra pieces, but all the pieces you're talking about, they currently exist.
I get it. So, briefly about trust, tell me how you think we're going to build international trust.
One of the key areas that I've been in discussions with people about is, can we identify for the average user when they're scrolling through social media the source of the content that they are receiving? Really basic principle. When you think about the degree to which Iran, China, Russia, and others, and the Koreans, the North Koreans are pushing out disinformation. And we've seen it growing rapidly since October 7th, where we saw all of the countries that I mentioned, including a group in Qatar, that were pushing out disinformation. We saw it during the recent shooting that happened with Charlie Kirk. There were a series of people that were analyzing how that information was coming. If you were scrolling through Twitter, scrolling through Instagram, scrolling through Facebook, and you're looking at a video and all of a sudden it pops up that this video came from blank, wouldn't that make you wonder about whether or not it was true? And the capabilities are there. But the way that video and information feeds through these social media platforms, the social media platforms would have to allow it to happen, or they would have to be the drivers.
That also, I mean, Lisa, to me, you're crushing incredible points today. And honestly, I think we could do a 4-hour podcast to unpack all of this, because these are incredibly timely issues and incredibly complex issues. And I can understand what you say, and I can understand about all the changes in laws that might have to happen, and whether people will wonder about the constitutionality of those, and, abridgments of free speech and how to police it. And it's a morass. It's a morass.
And we can't police free speech. But if you knew that video you were seeing came from Russia, wouldn't you question the veracity of the video? Wouldn't you? If you knew it was coming from Iran, wouldn't you go, oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe it's not true.
Sure. And again, just briefly, but then you run into the situation. Some of these actors are really good at masking where things are coming from. And so it seems like it would be a constant race where you discover something, they might have another way, et cetera, et cetera. But I definitely hear you. So I want to also turn now to turnarounds, because you are a turnaround queen, for lack of a better term. So you wrote a book called Turnaround: How to Change Course When Things Are Going South. So what prompted you to write the book?
It was during COVID, and I actually got a call from a publisher, from Rohit Bhagrava, who owns Idea Publishing. And he said he was friends with a friend of mine. He goes, you should write a book. And you've done so many turnarounds in business, government, and philanthropy. And as we are coming out of COVID, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to need that information. The principles that I learned at Intel Corporation during the time period of Andy Grove and Gordon Moore, who were really the original sort of Intel executives, and under Craig Barrett, those are the same principles that I've applied in every single turnaround. And so whether or not I was U.S. ambassador to the World Expo and having to figure out a way of bringing forward the first privatized U.S. operation through a State Department program without any government funds, or whether it was creating the largest self-commitment from the food and beverage industry on behalf of 16 CEOs during the time period of the Let's Move campaign with Michelle Obama, I have always gone back to the principles I learned from Andy Grove. And one of his principles is only the paranoid survive, always a good thing to keep in mind. But his others were process. Everything is a process. Everything can be valued quantitatively. When you set your objectives and key results, you can actually measure those, and you have to use quantitative data points in order to say whether or not what you say you're going to do during the next quarter works. When you apply those basic constructs to a turnaround, that's where you're able to actually see progress, measure progress, and look towards the future of knowing what you want to achieve, but the things you're going to have to let go.
What advice would you give today to people who are facing business challenges?
Flexibility is key. And I know, and right now we operate on a quarterly basis. We're reporting out earnings. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not we're going to continue to do it that way within Washington. But the reality is you have to give people flexibility. When I do a turnaround, because of if I'm within the context of a philanthropy, I actually always require that I be allowed to work off of a 3-year budget. Because what I know is there are times where I'm going to have to spend more money, and there are times where I'm going to have to spend less money. And because we don't know where the holes are in the system, I can give a budget. I can start moving the boulders out of the way, but I can't always anticipate where something's going to have to get fixed before we can move forward with the deliverable that we are trying to use to execute our turnaround. And so flexibility is a key part of it. The other is letting things go. The hardest thing in every institution with whom I have ever worked is letting things go. And I always recommend to people go back and actually read the original bylaws, the original charter, the original report from Congress as to why an institution was started. Why did we start this thing in the first place? And ask yourself whether or not that thing fundamentally is still meeting that need, and does that need continue to exist? And the reason I raise that is sometimes we've gotten so far off track, and Intel Corporation is a good example of this, right? When I worked at Intel, it was the powerhouse. We had 75% of the semiconductor market. And slowly over the last 20 years, Intel lost job one. They lost being the number one semiconductor manufacturer in the world. That's what they lost. And so, if they'd gone back and looked at, well, what did Andy say job one was 40 years ago when we were at the top? Andy would always say, get rid of this other stuff. You don't need to be doing this other stuff. That's the hardest thing for people to do, is focus on that. Second is when you go back to the original documents, you may discover that your organization's done its job and it no longer needs to exist. And we have a horrible time, especially in Washington. Washington does not do a good job of closing doors. And I am a big believer with whether it's a philanthropy, an association, or a government operation. If you accomplished the thing that you were supposed to accomplish, celebrate, declare victory, shut it down, and move on.
What a novel concept. Again, something that we could talk about honestly for an hour. So I want to focus on business owners for a sec too. There's a divided government. As you know, we are a polarized country. And I think, and I'm sure you know, a lot of businesses don't feel secure when there's uncertainty. So what advice would you give to businesses today with respect to the decisions they're making when the government is so divided? And of course, who knows how long the shutdown is going to last and what the effect of it is going to be. But what would you say to businesses? Have they said to you, hey, Lisa, should we be bold? Should we be cautious? How do we measure which way we should go?
Going back, two things. One is, as I said, Andy Grove's quote that I've always leaned on is only the paranoid survive. So you got to be paranoid, right? You've got to be paranoid that due to something that happened within the government or due to a foreign operator or some competitor that, you could get killed off at any day. And so if you understand that, caution is important, but it can't guide you. One thing I remember distinctly about Apple, and I can talk about this now, when they were my client, was in between the Steve Jobs days. And every time they went through a reorg, everybody just stopped working. Literally. And I've run into so many companies like that. And when I mean it's like they all stop making decisions while we're having a reorg. Well, I'm sorry, you still have a customer. Your customer's still expecting this. You are still launching this product. And yeah, things may change, but until somebody tells you to stop, don't stop. Keep going. And that is, again, a very difficult thing during challenging times. You have to keep going, but you also have to be nimble. And what I learned from some of the pharmaceutical companies, and I actually instituted this within the medical research organization that I was running, is have your game plan to be quarterly based, but also a year out. And what I mean by that is plan for disaster at the end of each quarter. So at least if there's total disaster, if everything goes to hell in a handbasket, you know what you're going to do. But you continue to operate on your 12-month plan. So you got your 12-month plan, but you have war gamed out your options. So you know if these 3 things happen, or if this one thing happens, then we're going to pivot over here. As opposed to we're in the middle, we're running, and then hell happens and you start to pivot, but you haven't pre-planned it. And if you pre-plan your pivots based on your war gaming, which is the same thing the military does, you have a greater chance of success during time periods where things are unpredictable.
It's interesting. A few weeks ago, I had on Congressman Mast, the chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee, and he talked about game theory and how people were planning on dealing with the tariffs, the trade agreements and stuff. So it's interesting that you're talking about it too. So, and speaking of the military, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about military readiness, especially because we do seem to have nations that either are aggressive or are talking like they're aggressive. And for a while now, some would say we've been a little bit of complacent. What are your views on how to make sure that we can maintain our standing as a deterrent to bad actors?
We need to ensure that the military has the equipment that they need in order to fight the wars that we're going to have. And we have not done that. So we created a defense acquisition process that says, well, when you give stuff away, so if we gave stuff to Ukraine, then we could replace it. That's a really, but that's what we did. That's what we did for the last 5 years. Is the only way you could replace something is if you gave something away. It's one reason why people were feeling perfectly fine about giving away different weapon systems, older weapon systems to the Ukrainians, because then they got to replace them. Well, what we should be doing is going back and saying, how many naval ships do we need? Because right now, China controls a lot of the ports around the world. So if we look at any potential of a conflict in Asia, particularly in Taiwan, we're not only going to have a conflict that's going to require a very strong Navy, but we're also going to have a conflict where your supply chain is coming from ports around the world that the Chinese have more control over. And so we do need to make sure that we are looking holistically at rebuilding certain weapon systems, rebuilding our Navy. And then where we're in a good place right now is that we do have companies like Palantir and others who are looking at more, and Palmer Luckey's company, Elon Musk, you have other people who are looking at war of the future. But it's going to take a combination. What we've always known is that we plan for wars in a particular way, and then we're planning based on past wars. We're not planning based on where the world will be. The good news is that we have the opportunity right now to both rebuild key functions that we need to have, build out the technology that we need to have, and give the military the opportunity to build that technology. And then third, ensuring that we are looking at what the future holds. And we've had 2 test cases, right? I mean, that's the unfortunate thing, but it is also the benefit with the war in Israel and Gaza and the war in Ukraine. We kind of know real time where changes need to be made in different systems, such as with drones.
Karl Block is both a corporate lawyer and a corporate restructuring partner. Nothing in the podcast should be construed as legal advice.
If you want more info on the show, please visit blockandtackleshow.com. And you can also email me at carl@blockandtackleshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.